Exciting news, ladies. You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This is my 10-week group coaching program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the third week of September. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam, F-A-M, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/fam. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 382. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of two beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Do you check your BBT, your basal body temperature? I'm asking because I get so many questions about BBT. It's one of the questions that I get most frequently. There's a lot of questions around taking it and interpretation and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I would do an episode today to talk a little bit about basal body temperature with a focus, though, on managing low basal body temperatures, because that's also a really important topic that I get a lot of questions about. So I thought I would just go ahead and jump right in to BBT. So what is BBT? What is the basal body temperature? So at a most basic level, basal body temperature is a measure of your metabolism. And so what happens in the menstrual cycle is that after you have your period, you start approaching ovulation as your follicles develop, as your ovaries develop the follicles. Follicles are fluid-filled sacs that contain the egg. And so as those follicles develop, they make estrogen. Once you make a certain amount of estrogen, that triggers ovulation. Indirectly, that sends a feedback to the pituitary, which then releases luteinizing hormone, which then triggers ovulation. And once you ovulate, then your same follicle that was making all of that estrogen turns into what's called the corpus luteum and starts making progesterone. So you make estrogen in the pre-ovulatory phase, and in the post-ovulatory phase, you make significant amounts of progesterone, and also you continue to make estrogen. So what does this have to do with the BBT? Well, the reason that we take the basal body temperature each day, first thing in the morning before you get out of bed, is to get a measure of your metabolism. And after ovulation, the progesterone has a thermogenic effect on the body, which raises your metabolism, actually raises your temperature. And for those of you who are charting, you can see that. You can see it on the chart. You can see that if you've truly ovulated, you'll have a clear and obvious shift in your temperatures, and the temperatures will raise and stay high for the remainder of the cycle. And if you are not pregnant, the temperature will drop and you'll get your period around the same time. And if you are pregnant, the temperatures will stay high and sometimes even rise higher. So kind of like sometimes you'll have like a third shift or just like a little bit of a continued temperature rise if you are actually pregnant. So that's what the basal body temperature is. And so I think it's a good idea to address some of the basic questions first, and then we can get into a little bit more of the conversation around, what is a normal temperature and why might the temperature not be where it's supposed to be. So I get a lot of basic questions about taking temperature. One of the most common questions that I receive is, what thermometer do I recommend? I mean, maybe it would make sense to endorse a specific thermometer and get behind a certain brand. But at this stage, in order for you to get started with charting, you don't actually need any fancy thermometers, any specific brand. You can get started with charting with any digital thermometer that goes to either 1 or 2 decimal points. And it can be as basic as that. So most thermometers that you can buy these days will have 2 decimal points. So for example, like 97.02, but you could actually get by with a thermometer that has 1 decimal point. So like 97.0, for example. I would encourage you to, I mean, I know a lot of people are shopping online and stuff like that. So if you go onto your favorite retailer online and you kind of like look for a basal body thermometer, look at the ratings and see who's happy and with which ones. And then you can also decide if there's additional features that you want, like if you want it to be backlit, if you want it to sync with your phone, if you want it to have memory, or if you want it to be able to switch between Celsius and Fahrenheit. So that's one of the questions that I get all the time, like what kind of thermometer. But ultimately, when you're wanting to jump into charting, I think it's good to just jump in and go, and you can usually find a good thermometer for, $20. So if you'll remember, recently Temp Drop sponsored the podcast. And so if you're looking for, because I know for a lot of women, it is really nice to have tech. And a lot of women do struggle with the temperature issue regarding getting up at the same time every day. And if you have little kids, or if you have animals, or whatever it is that's keeping you up at night and not really allowing you to get a good sleep, then, something like the Temp Drop is a really good option for helping you to overcome that. But ultimately, what we're talking about today is, identifying if your temperature is in normal range, and then kind of looking at some of the potential issues that could cause your temperature to be too low. And so because you're, for women who are charting and if you're taking your temperature every day, what is normal in terms of the range for basal body temperature? So when I'm looking at the range, I think that it's helpful for me. I look at the pre-ovulatory phase first, because the pre-ovulatory phase and the post-ovulatory phase are directly related. So what I mean by that is that if you look at the temperatures before ovulation, if those temperatures are normal, the post-ovulatory temperatures are often, they're going to be in relation to that. So they're much more likely to be normal. So we can actually look at the pre-ovulatory phase and kind of go from there. And so generally speaking, what we're looking for in terms of a normal temperature range, we would want those pre-ovulatory temperatures at least at about 97.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 36.3 degrees Celsius, meaning that the lowest your temperature goes, we ideally want it to be about there. Now, I know a lot of women have temperatures that are a lot lower than that. I've released my Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook a couple years ago. In that book, it's a physical paper charting workbook. For those of you who aren't familiar, for more information, you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook. But in that book, I get a lot of comments like, where's the low temperature option? I tried to include as much options as I could. I created a separate Fahrenheit version and a separate Celsius version. And so, I did that part. But the way that I created the actual chart in the book, there's a limit. So the temperatures start at 97.0 in the Fahrenheit option, and the temperatures start at 36.0 in the Celsius option. And I did that intentionally because although it's nice to have, with the charting apps and different charts that accommodate for really low temperatures, it's not something that you should have. You shouldn't actually have your temperature every day 96.5 or something like that. And if the temperature is that low, that's potentially an issue. And so we'll get into that. So by creating the physical charting workbook in a specific way, I was basically gently nudging you that if your temperature is literally off the chart, like if it's not on the page, then this is something we should be looking into, because it is possible to get the temperatures in good range. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So with that said, before we can assume that there's something wrong with you, I often say in my classes, I don't like to jump to conclusions, because there are different reasons why your temperature could be too low that aren't necessarily health related. So at a very basic level, if I'm starting to work with a new client or if someone's in one of my group programs and, her temperatures are really low, the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of check how she's taking her temperature. So for those of you who've listened to the podcast for a while, you already know that I recommend taking your temperature if you're using a digital thermometer. The most common ways of taking the temperature with a digital thermometer, most of my clients check orally. You can also check under the arm, that's axillary, and you can check vaginally as well. But when you're taking your temperature, you want to choose one and you want to kind of stick with that one, and you can switch, but you'd want to make a note of it on your chart. And you wouldn't necessarily want to switch back and forth every day between your orally and axillary, like the underarm, because, for example, the underarm is outside of your body, whereas the orally is inside of your body, similar to the vaginally. And so if you were to take your temperature under the arm, it's probably going to be a little cooler than if you were to take it in the mouth. So the first thing is that I recommend for you to, hold the thermometer in place for 10 minutes. I know a lot of people find that annoying, but that allows the thermometer to warm up and it allows the temperature to stabilize. And so for any of you who've tried it, you've seen for yourself that what happens when you do that is that you have less of the fluctuations. So instead of having temperatures up and down all the time, you typically end up having a more stable chart. So, you don't have to take my word for it, like literally try it and then, let me know how it goes. I've been doing this for a while, so I don't recommend things just for fun or to annoy people. So that's one of the first things, to literally, are you checking your temperature correctly? And then the other thing too is if you're using different devices, so there's some devices that take temperature in different ways. There's like rings that take temperatures on your fingers, and then there's devices that take temperatures on your wrist and other extremities. So those types of thermometers, they are not taking your basal body temperature because your basal body temperature is not on your wrist or on your finger. And so that's something to be aware of as well. Because if you are taking your temperature from your wrist or your finger, the temperature is likely going to be lower because it's your wrist. If you're wanting to get that additional information about your metabolism and kind of use that vital sign aspect of your menstrual cycle, then I do, especially for my clients and women who I'm working with, I recommend that they test it that way, at least for a period of time, so that we can at least look at that and kind of check it off the box. Is your metabolism okay? Are your temperatures in range? Okay, good. And then once we do that, you can certainly switch to your favorite device or something like that to just for the ease of confirming ovulation. But for the purpose of actually measuring metabolism with the BBT, then we want to actually do oral temping or underarm temping or vaginal temping, for example. And just for anyone who's kind of why does she keep saying vaginal temping? So for one of the benefits of vaginal temping, even though it might sound strange if you've never heard of it, is that it can be a little bit more stable because, again, it is internal. And especially given my recommendation of 10 minutes, a lot of women find it easier to just do that instead of, if you fall back asleep, your mouth's hanging open, etc., you might not get the most accurate temp. So just a little side note there. So that's basically the first step. The first thing we want to do is make sure that the temperature on the chart is actually accurate. So that's the first step. And then the other thing I should say, just to put it out there, is that sometimes there's an issue with the thermometer. It's not the most common thing, but I have had a couple clients where their thermometer was actually wrong or broken or old or off. And so they switched thermometers and actually the temperatures were fine. So that's just something to just know. If your thermometer is 65 years old or something, and it's not a mercury thermometer, because mercury thermometers are probably fine. Okay. So that's the first thing. So after we've kind of figured that out and you are taking your temperature correctly, and I should say also that for some women, if they start doing the 10-minute thing, often their temperatures are actually higher than they thought because the thermometer just hasn't been given enough time to warm up. So there are some women who don't actually have a problem, but think their temperatures are really low. But then when they start taking their temperature correctly, it actually improves that. So that's kind of the preamble of before we can assume that you have this health problem and start going down that road, we should just actually check to see what's really going on. So then once we have done all of that, you're taking your temperature correctly, your thermometer is not broken, and we are seeing an actual low temperature situation. That's what we're kind of getting to now. So what do you do? So if your temperature is legitimately too low, and again, so too low would be if you're tracking in Fahrenheit, most of those pre-ovulatory temperatures are below about 97.4 Fahrenheit. And it's consistent. And when the temperatures are really, really low, often the post-ovulatory temperatures are low as well. So in a normal cycle, with most of those pre-ov temperatures higher than about 97.4, after you ovulate, you typically do have a few temperatures that are over 98 degrees. So that's what I mean when I say like it's comparable. And then similarly with Fahrenheit, if your temperatures are normal, so over about 36.3 Celsius, then once you ovulate, you would typically see at least one of those temperatures that are edging up to about 37 degrees Celsius post-ovulatory.
Just jumping into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. My 10-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. You still have a little bit of time. Registration closes next week. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM, F-A-M, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode.
So why? Why does this happen? So I've listed the top 6 reasons why your BBT could be low. So it's not to say these are the only reasons. These are what I typically see. And so we'll go through them. So the first thing, one of the reasons that your temperature might be too low is if you happen to be regularly skipping breakfast or intermittent fasting. So this is certainly something I've been talking about on the show quite a bit, because if you don't eat enough food, you're literally, like, your metabolism is literally going to be lower and you're literally going to be colder because your body has to conserve energy in order to maintain your overall health. So your body is really smart. I think a lot of times we think that our bodies are failing us or doing something to us, like, why is my cycle this way? But really your body is typically actually trying to help you by kind of organizing itself to adjust to whatever it is that you're putting it through. So that would be one of the top reasons. It's often not a mystery, especially if you like regularly skip breakfast or regularly kind of don't eat 3 full meals a day. So the second reason is right in line with that. So not consuming enough overall calories, especially protein. So even if you are eating 3 meals a day, if your first meal is like a piece of toast or something, then you may not be consuming enough overall calories and you may not be consuming enough protein. So 1 and 2 kind of go together. If you want your temperature, your metabolism to be optimal, you need to fuel your body. And that means, from my perspective, 3 meals a day with sufficient protein, fat, and carbohydrates at each meal. So number 3, not getting enough sleep. So that's a pretty obvious one. Again, in the work that I do, we don't often really examine ourselves. Like if you're really busy and you're kind of living life and you've got a lot going on and you're charting and you notice these low temps, you may not necessarily stop and actually kind of take yourself out of the kind of mindset there and look at these things. So it might seem kind of obvious, like, well, yeah, but we got to look at that too. So enough sleep is like 7 hours a night and then ideally also sleeping in the dark, because sleeping in the dark supports optimal hormone production, particularly progesterone in the post-ovulatory phase, but is important for overall hormone production. But yeah, so if you're going to sleep at like midnight and you're waking up at 5 for work, yeah, your temperature probably isn't going to be where it needs to be, because what the research tells us is that pretty much everyone needs a minimum of 7 hours of sleep, because if we get less than that, that's when we start to increase our risk of a variety of health issues, from cancer to endometriosis to like all kinds of different problems. There's just a correlation in the research there. Okay, so number 4 is relying on coffee. I put that in there because if you drink coffee every single morning, there's a few things that can happen. So one is that, and I say coffee, but I mean coffee or anything caffeinated. So if you're having like black tea, if you're having like an energy drink with a bunch of caffeine in it, so all of those things can affect your temperature indirectly. And so, why does it do that? Well, if you're drinking caffeine in the morning, then what can happen is that it can cause you not to be hungry enough to eat as much food as your body really needs. Coffee and like cigarettes, for example, they suppress your appetite. So when you consume them on a regular basis, you end up eating less. And so for anyone who does have their coffee or their black tea or their energy drink, first thing in the morning, you may find that when you do that, you can go a lot longer before your next meal. And so it can kind of mask your true level of hunger. And especially when you get into the habit of that, if you've been doing it for years and years, you don't necessarily notice it, perceive it, or even think that it's a real thing. So if you have really low temps and you're concerned about it and you do drink coffee every single day, or again, black tea or your energy drink, you just want to think about that. And the way to test it out, to see if there's something to this would be to commit to removing it for a full cycle and see what happens. So that's number 4, relying on coffee. And there's something else that I just want to add to that point, which is that if you do rely on coffee every day when you get out of bed, then you may not be necessarily getting enough sleep, and the coffee might be the crutch. So when we have these crutches, if we're looking to, again, optimize our cycle naturally, the approach that I take is more of a functional approach. So looking at how to do things in a way that supports your body's kind of optimal function with the underlying assumption that your body isn't broken, that your body can actually do this. So if we get out of our body's way, then our body kind of naturally moves to achieve optimal health, and our cycles naturally move towards a more balanced scenario. And so literally, this is kind of me trying to help you get out of your own way, essentially. But when you're relying on it, especially like first thing in the morning every day, then what can happen is, again, you may not be perceiving how you really feel. Like if you go without the coffee and you can barely get out of bed, then that might be a sign that your adrenals need some time to kind of normalize. So it can have a negative effect. Okay, so number 5. So again, the reasons why your BBT might be too low. So, it can be related to nutrient deficiencies. There are certain nutrients that work together to optimize our thyroid function, including zinc and iron and iodine and, a number of other nutrients. If you're really deficient in one of those areas, it can cause some degree of thermal dysregulation, particularly if you just, recently came off birth control. It could be a transient thing. But we know that the pill does deplete zinc in particular and B vitamins and a number of other nutrients. So that's something to look at for sure. And then 6, so kind of the last reason on my list, and again, it doesn't mean that these are the only reasons, but these are what I see a lot, would be thyroid. But you'll notice that I said thyroid last and not first. What I find is that the majority of the time, there's other things that could potentially be contributing to this issue. So we can't just jump to like, okay, she's got low temp, she must have an issue with her thyroid. She might, but even if you have a mild kind of subclinical issue with your thyroid, if you're not eating breakfast and blah, 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 like all the things we just talked about, you can see a dramatic improvement just by improving those things. So that is basically the most that's a summary of the most common reasons why I have seen that the temperature is too low on the chart. And the good news here is that it's really fixable for most women and within a reasonable amount of time. It means that there's a lot of things that we can do. And then even if you do all those things and it doesn't necessarily give you the results you want, you determine you have a thyroid issue, etc. Even then there's still a solution because if you have a legitimate thyroid issue, you can have that addressed, working with a functional practitioner or something along those lines. And so the best way, so to kind of summarize, so the top reasons were skipping breakfast, not getting enough overall calories, especially protein, not getting enough sleep, relying too heavily on coffee, nutrient deficiencies, and potentially a thyroid issue. And so basically to summarize like how you would approach it, you would kind of like go through the list and chart throughout the process. So you can expect anywhere from 1 to 3 full cycles. If you're really giving this a good go, you can track your temperatures. Again, make sure you're doing all the correct temperature taking that we talked about initially, and you'll see for yourself with your own eyes if there is an improvement over time with regards to your temperature. This is the strategy that I use with my clients in my programs. Like this is only one aspect, right? Like this is only one issue, but generally the strategy that I use with my clients is similar to this. And it's incredible how much of an improvement you can see in your cycles, in your charts by making some of these changes. And obviously, if you improve, all of these things that we've talked about today, you'll see an improvement in your temperature, but you'll probably see more than that. You might find that you're sleeping better. You might find that you generally feel warmer and more energized. You might feel more alert, like you have more energy. So often there are a lot of other side benefits because, the secret that's not a secret about achieving optimal menstrual cycle health is that our menstrual cycles are in great health when we are in great health. And so if we work specifically on these particular challenges, we typically end up overall feeling and doing a lot better. So I hope that after tuning into today's episode, you're feeling a lot more comfortable and confident with the basal body temperature in general, especially if you've been struggling with low BBT. I hope that you have a bit of a roadmap to try out some of these action steps that we talked about today. If you are ready to jump in and go really do a deep dive with me into your charts and your cycles, whether you're planning to use fertility awareness for birth control, for conception, or whether you're wanting to dive more into these health topics and really get a sense of what you can learn about your overall health through charting, then I do invite you to join us in my upcoming Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group coaching program. We'll be diving into these topics and so much more over a 10-week period, which typically allows for us to go through about 3 full cycles together. So somewhere between 2 to 3 full cycles minimum that we're able to go through together. And there's so much transformation that can happen during that period of time. So for details and to register, you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM. That's FAM. And if today's episode was helpful for you, and if you know somebody who could benefit from hearing it, then I do invite you to share it. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/382. And with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you are tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.